Having 2 degrees and literally having a focus on conflict, peace, and security, which is basically just authoritarian shit and mass scale social violence, political violence, transitional justice, all of that exciting stuff that is really fucking sad because a lot of times there's no legalities to actually solve it because it's so big of a problem. Means that I don't give a fuck when anyone calls me a doomer. Like, I've had Democrats call me a doomer or something like that, and I'm just like, it's not my fault that you lack the actual intellectual knowledge to be capable of seeing beyond American exceptionalism, because that's the problem. We think that we're too big to fail, but so were the banks in 2008, so was Titanic, so was the Titan. The fact Americans are intellectually disenfranchised, therefore don't have the knowledge to be capable of seeing steps ahead of what's happening, is the problem. However, that is a personal flaw of those people and not of mine, because I have 2 degrees, political science and international relations and international law. I wrote my thesis on a very unique perspective that explored the intersection between international law and historical trauma. Basically arguing that traditional law hinders conflict because it utilizes legal formalism in order to legitimize authoritarian and autocratic rule. Therefore, that transitional justice that happens is insufficient to actually address the psychosocial consequences of what had occurred. Mostly because what's expected is for the victims to forgive the perpetrators without the perpetrators having any accountability for what they did. The fact we didn't do this in any of our conflicts, literally after the H calls, we had Operation Paperclip where we brought over some of the Yahtzees because we were like, they're good people. The fact we never made the Confederacy illegal and actually allowed for Americans to observe that into American identity when the Confederacy are traitors to the country. That meant that we've never actually healed our conflict, and therefore what we see today is intergenerational hostility. People who felt an injustice in the Confederacy being ended, in the Articles of Confederation being ended, and want to restore that power. It's quite simple when you have the knowledge, but when you don't, that's when you call people doomers, because you lack the knowledge to actually produce any substantial critical thinking for what's occurring because it's unprecedented. And since you don't actually have that precedented knowledge, you do not realize how severe this is. So I have some sympathy for the people who don't actually understand the urgency because they lack the knowledge to actually think about this in a proper, substantial way that will actually produce an impact. Now, this goes for both liberals who may think that it's too much theory, which is ridiculous because you have to understand those principles in order to understand what's occurring. Somehow we think we are immune from any of those concepts because we're the United States of America, which is stupid. And yes, there is such a thing as too much theory, which is why I don't talk about pure academia here, where I just generalize it so that it's much more digestible for what matters. But they may also think that the Constitution is perfect and doesn't need to change. But if the Constitution was perfect, then we wouldn't be here because it means that our guardrails would have worked. They didn't work. And to think that the courts and the legislative, which are the very channels that failed, would be the ones to save us when they would have to actually admit fault and allowing for this to occur, is ridiculous. To think there will be willingness from them is ridiculous. Yes, we can force willingness, but people just expect for them to grow willingness through our phone calls. It's not gonna happen, and history tells us it's not gonna happen. Had South Korea now moved out and forced their government, he wouldn't have been impeached. Now, liberals also cry about martial law. Have y'all not read resistance history? What do you think happened during the civil rights movement? What do you think happened during the East LA walkouts? Harm against the community is always very real, and the people who don't understand that have to be white. Now, I definitely understand why it can be a danger for much more people of more tone, right? But over 250 million Americans are considered to be white. So if we need 12 million to 13 million on the streets, that can very easily come from the ones who have that skin privilege. They will treat a Karen who is protesting much differently than a black protester. But also on the left, there may be some false hope that there's somehow going to be some foreign entity like the ICC who will come and save us, which is untrue. It's untrue, and I cannot repeat myself and saying how it is untrue that the ICC will get him. Jack Smith had more pull at the DOJ than he will ever have in the ICC against Americans. And people aren't understanding that even when I say it. So please, I'm going to say right now, the ICC is not impactful to our angle. No, I have not read the lawsuit because it's not important right now. I remember annoying a follower because she asked me what I thought about, there was something about like a March 14 deadline, and I'm just like, had Democrats had an actual plan, they would have done it before. So there's no insider plan right now in the Democratic Party to do anything. Kamala Harris isn't a savior who's in the background, shadows just waiting to come out. She's already told us that if anything fixes this, it's gonna be we the people. Like, both sides just like to stand at empty wells, just negating truth and standing with familiar misery, when I'll rather be in pursuit of the right well than be waiting at an empty well. Like, anyone who thinks that midterms will solve this aren't actually paying attention, and they're the ones who say doomers, right? But they don't recognize that these are characteristics that have already happened before. Everything that I've said has literally come true. I'm not a sidekick, it's just my background. And that crisis started at the fact that if Amendment 14 Section 3 is optional, then so are all the provisions of the United States Constitution. And now we're seeing that play out when all of those provisions are becoming optional. See, sometimes I wish I didn't have knowledge, because then I can at least be delusional, like there's people on the liberal side and even on the leftist side who are delusional about what can actually fix this. Unfortunately, I cannot, and I know that it's much more comfortable when you're delusional about what's actually occurring, but being delusional won't actually help us get out of this. We need objective hope, not just any hope. And pretty much a lot of what I've said, a lot of the obstacles that we've been facing are things that I've touched upon even before the election. So it's really not that complicated. Americans just fail to understand that this isn't unique to the American experience. We're not special. But people think we're some supreme breed where our Constitution will survive whatever it is, but it's not even surviving this. The fact that there was no Senate, no court who even cared to actually satisfy Amendment 14 Section 3 because they held their own interpretations of it tells us that our guardrails don't work, which means that our Constitution is insufficient. But we cannot have a constitutional convention because obviously that's going to accelerate the ratification of unconstitutional order. What this means, I don't know. Unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions, but the traditional ways of doing it won't work. And we're learning that. We're learning that, and we're learning that, and we're learning that, and we're not learning anything better because we think that the Democratic Party continuing its centrist ways is going to work, and it's not. It's going to lose us elections. The problem is the DNC. The problem is the DNC framework. Unless we change that, we're going to continue a party that is much more centrist than it is moderate. What's the difference? A centrist is between liberals and conservatives. That deserves its own party. Democrats should be the center between the left and liberals. If you identify more as a centrist, that means you have to start working on your own political party. Like, sometimes the solution is simple and sometimes the solution is much more complex. When it comes to our party, the solution is simple. Ken Martin, not a good DNC chair. Complex, how we dissolve his government. The courts won't charge contempt charges against him for the same reason that President Joe Biden didn't force the archivist to publish the Equal Rights Amendment because he technically didn't have to. At least there wasn't any authority that forced him to. So the only doom that we have is the fact that our branches aren't working like they should. And why? Because the Constitution is insufficient to lead them and force them to do so. Anyone who disagrees is new to politics and needs to shut up when people who actually know more about what they do are talking.